March 17, 1945. 15th Air Force Intelligence Section, Foggia Main Airfield, Italy. Captain Robert Sullivan runs his finger down a column of numbers in the latest Luftwaffe intercept translation, his coffee growing cold in the cramped operations room. The document, designated Signal Intelligence Report 847B, had been decoded from a radio transmission between Jagdgeschwader 53's headquarters at Kirchheim and subordinate squadrons 2 days earlier. Sullivan reads the German text again, then checks his translation. This cannot be tactical doctrine. No fighter command orders its pilots to disengage based on escort identification. The directive is explicit. When bomber formations identified with close-range red-tailed escort fighters, assess alternative target opportunities before committing to engagement. Priority reassignment authorized without command consultation. Sullivan crosses the room to the mission analysis board. The 332nd Fighter Group, the only unit painting their P-51D Mustang tails entirely red, has been flying bomber escort missions since June 1944. He traces their loss statistics with his finger. In 9 months of operations, the 332nd has escorted 179 heavy bomber missions. Total bombers lost to enemy fighters from 332nd protected formations, 27 aircraft. The 15th Air Force average for the same period, 46 bombers lost per fighter group. But the number that stops Sullivan's finger is in the air-to-air combat column. The 332nd has claimed 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. Their own losses to enemy action, 16 pilots. The ratio is unprecedented. 7 German aircraft destroyed for every American pilot lost. Sullivan pulls the file containing February's Luftwaffe pilot interrogation transcripts. Hauptmann Emil Clade, shot down March 3 over Austria, had been surprisingly forthcoming. The interrogator's notes quote him directly. "We were briefed that the Negro Squadron flies protection differently. They do not leave the bombers to chase us. This makes them..." The translation note indicates Clade struggled for the English word. Unshakable. "Our tactics depend on separating escorts from bombers. Against the red tails, this does not work." The implications are staggering. The same Luftwaffe that had claimed racial superiority as a pillar of Nazi ideology was instructing its fighter pilots to avoid combat with black American aviators, not out of mercy, but out of tactical mathematics. The 332nd Fighter Group had achieved something no other American escort unit accomplished. They had made the German Air Force afraid to engage them. The journey to this tactical dominance had begun 4 years earlier in a converted municipal airport outside Tuskegee, Alabama. On July 19, 1941, the first class of 13 black aviation cadets reported to Tuskegee Army Airfield. The experiment, for that is precisely how the Army Air Corps termed it, was designed to determine whether Negroes possessed the intelligence, courage, and reflexes necessary for combat aviation. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., West Point class of 1936, and the program's senior black officer, understood the burden. As he wrote in his flight log that first day, "We are not just learning to fly. We are proving a race capable." The training was deliberately rigorous. Washout rates exceeded 50%, higher than white aviation cadet programs. Some instructors clearly hoped the program would fail through attrition, but those who graduated were exceptional. By November 1942, the 99th Fighter Squadron had completed training. On April 15, 1943, they departed for North Africa, flying obsolete Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, arriving at Farjuna, Tunisia on April 24. Their first combat mission came July 2, 1943. Captain Charles Hall was flying a routine patrol over Castelvetrano, Sicily, when his flight encountered a formation of German Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters. At 11:42 in the morning, Hall's guns found their mark. One FW-190 went down in flames, the 99th's first confirmed kill. But it was also a symbolic kill, proof that Tuskegee pilots could fight and win. Yet skepticism persisted. After 3 months of combat in Sicily, a September 1943 report from Colonel William Momyer claimed the 99th lacked the aggressiveness and skill for combat operations. The report nearly ended the entire program. Only a Pentagon investigation, which found no statistical basis for Momyer's claims, saved it. The War Department's decision: expand the program. By May 1944, 3 more black fighter squadrons had formed: the 100th, 301st, and 302nd. Together with the 99th, they constituted the 332nd Fighter Group under Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., now promoted and given full command. On June 9, 1944, the 332nd arrived at Ramitelli Airfield, Italy, flying Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Their mission: escort 15th Air Force heavy bombers attacking strategic targets across southern Europe and Germany. It was here that Davis made the decision that would define his unit's legacy. On June 24, he assembled his squadron commanders and issued what became known as the "Stick with the Bombers" order. The doctrine was simple but revolutionary: never leave the bomber formation to chase German fighters. Every other fighter group in the 15th Air Force used free chase tactics. When German fighters appeared, American escorts would break formation to pursue them. This created spectacular dogfights and impressive individual victory totals. But it also left bombers vulnerable. Davis's order reversed this priority. The 332nd's mission was bomber protection, not personal glory. Kill German fighters only if they threaten the bombers. Otherwise, stay tight on the formations. In July 1944, the 332nd transitioned to North American P-51D Mustangs, the war's premier long-range fighter. To make their aircraft instantly identifiable, Davis ordered the tails painted bright red. Other units marked their planes with colored noses or stripes. The 332nd went further: every vertical stabilizer entirely red. The visual signature was unmistakable. The distinctive red tails began appearing in Luftwaffe after-action reports by August 1944. August 24, 1944. The 332nd escorted B-17 Flying Fortresses attacking the Blechhammer oil refineries in Silesia. 18 Messerschmitt Bf-109G fighters from Jagdgeschwader 27 attempted to penetrate the bomber formation. The 332nd's P-51s immediately tightened their formation, closing to within 1,000 feet of the bombers, what German tactical analysts would later describe as suicidally, or suicidally close. The Luftwaffe fighters made 3 attack runs. On each pass, they encountered concentrated defensive fire from both bombers and the tightly grouped escorts. 3 Bf-109s were shot down. 0 bombers lost. September 12, 1944. Over Varese, Italy, the pattern repeated. The 332nd escorted B-24 Liberators hitting railway marshalling yards. 12 Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters attacked. The red-tailed P-51s maintained station. Lieutenant Clarence Lester shot down 3 German fighters in the space of 4 minutes. The 332nd's first triple ace in a single mission. No bombers lost. October 6, 1944. The target was the Skoda Armaments Works at Brooks, Czechoslovakia.
German fighters made repeated attempts to break through the escort screen. Captain Edward Toppens destroyed 2 Bf-109s. Lieutenant Robert Williams got another. The bombers completed their run untouched. Luftwaffe post-mission analysis noted the American escorts maintained formation discipline unusual for fighter units. By November 1944, a pattern had emerged in German tactical reports. The red-tailed American fighters didn't behave like other escort groups. They didn't take the bait when German fighters tried to draw them away from bomber formations. They stayed close, closer than any other unit. The standard Luftwaffe tactic of feinting attacks to separate escorts from bombers simply didn't work against the 332nd. From the bomber crew's perspective, the red tails meant safety. Technical Sergeant Samuel L. Jones, a B-17 tail gunner with the 99th Bomb Group, later wrote, "When we saw those red tails form up on us, we knew we were coming home. Other fighter groups would chase Jerry's halfway to Berlin and we'd be on our own. Not the red tails. They stayed on us like glue." The tactical advantage was mathematical. By maintaining formation discipline, the 332nd created overlapping fields of fire. German fighters couldn't isolate individual bombers without running a gauntlet of multiple P-51s firing simultaneously. The geometry of the defense was nearly perfect, but it depended entirely on the 332nd pilots' willingness to suppress their individual instincts for aggressive pursuit in favor of collective defensive positioning. Between June and December 1944, the 332nd flew 143 bomber escort missions. They lost 25 bombers to all causes: mechanical failure, flak, and enemy fighters combined. The 15th Air Force average for the same period was 63 bombers lost per fighter group. The difference was statistically impossible to ignore.
But by January 1945, the tactical picture began shifting in ways that would prove catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. January 27, 1945, the 332nd escorted B-17s attacking Munich rail yards. At 13:15, approximately 40 German fighters, a mixed force of Bf-109G and FW-190 models, attempted a coordinated attack. What happened next entered 332nd legend. Captain Wendell Pruitt and Lieutenant Gwen Pearson, flying as a two-plane element, engaged the German formation. The standard P-51 Mustang was armed with 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, each loaded with approximately 400 rounds. Combined cyclic rate 4,800 rounds per minute. Maximum effective range 400 yards. Pruitt opened fire at 350 yards, closing rapidly. His gun camera footage, later reviewed by tactical analysts, shows his first burst striking the cockpit of a Bf-109. The German fighter disintegrated. Pruitt didn't break formation. He stayed within 1,200 feet of the bombers and waited for the next target. It came seconds later. Another Bf-109 attempting to dive under the formation. Pruitt rolled inverted, pulled through, fired a 2-second burst. The 109 went down trailing smoke. In the space of 7 minutes, Pruitt destroyed 3 German fighters. Pearson got 2 more. 5 German aircraft down, 1 American element, 0 bombers lost. The gun camera footage reached Luftwaffe intelligence through a complex route. A downed P-51 recovered by German forces still had portions of its camera film intact. German analysts watched the footage repeatedly. What disturbed them wasn't the marksmanship, though that was exceptional. It was the tactical discipline. At multiple points in the engagement, Pruitt had clear opportunities to pursue damaged German fighters. He didn't. He returned to formation immediately after each engagement. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding fighter units in southern Germany, reviewed the footage and wrote in his daily intelligence summary, "The American Negro Squadron demonstrates tactical coordination that exceeds experienced Luftwaffe units. They treat escort duty as collective mission rather than individual opportunity. Standard fighter interception doctrine is ineffective against this approach. February 16, 1945, the critical incident. The 332nd escorted B-24s to Vienna. The target was the Floridsdorf oil refinery. Jagdgeschwader 53, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced fighter wings, attacked with 28 aircraft. The engagement lasted 19 minutes. When it ended, 11 German fighters had been shot down. Captain Lee Archer got 3 confirmed kills. His gun camera showed all 3 FW-190s exploding after direct hits. Lieutenant Joseph Ellsbury got 2. Lieutenant Roger Roman got 1. The 332nd lost 2 P-51s. Both pilots survived. One bailed out over friendly territory, the other made an emergency landing. 0 bombers lost. But the most significant moment came after the engagement. German survivors reported their experiences during post-mission debriefing. Lieutenant Franz Hartmann, who bailed out of his damaged Bf-109, told interrogators, "They do not fight like other Americans. They fight like a wall. You cannot find the gap." Jagdgeschwader's commander, Major Helmut Bennemann, ran the numbers. In 3 major engagements with the red-tailed American fighters in January and February, his unit had lost 23 aircraft. They had shot down 4 P-51s. The kill ratio was 5.75 to 1 against, and that wasn't counting bomber kills, which totaled exactly 0. Bennemann sent a situation report to General Major Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's fighter commander. The report's conclusion was stark. Continued engagement with 332nd Fighter Group under current tactical doctrine will result in unsustainable losses. Request revised engagement parameters. On February 22, 1945, Luftwaffe Fighter Command issued Tactical Directive 147. The relevant section read, "When bomber formations are identified with close escort fighters bearing distinctive red tail markings, fighter group commanders are authorized to assess alternative target opportunities before committing forces to engagement." It was a bureaucratic way of saying, if you see red tails, find another target. The order represented an extraordinary admission. The Luftwaffe, Hitler's Air Force, built on principles of German technological and tactical superiority, was telling its fighter pilots to avoid fighting black American aviators because the mathematical probability of victory was too low. American intelligence intercepted and decoded the directive. Captain Sullivan's discovery in March was not new intelligence. It was confirmation of a pattern that had been building for months. The Tuskegee Airmen had not just proven themselves equal. They had proven themselves superior enough that the enemy preferred to abandon missions rather than engage them. The 332nd's tactical dominance emerged from a doctrine developed under impossible pressure. When Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. assumed command in May 1944, he faced a specific set of constraints that would define his approach. First, scrutiny. Every mission would be analyzed for proof that black pilots were inferior. A single disaster would condemn the entire program. Second, distrust. Bomber crews requested white fighter escorts specifically, doubting black pilots' competence. Third, resources. The 332nd received replacement aircraft and pilots slower than white units. The mathematics were brutally simple. To survive politically, the 332nd needed a perfect record. To survive militarily, they needed to protect bombers at all costs. These two requirements existed in direct opposition to standard fighter tactics. Traditional fighter group doctrine, as practiced by every other unit in the 15th Air Force, prioritized air superiority. The assumption, if you shoot down enough enemy fighters, the bombers will be safe. This doctrine encouraged aggressive pursuit. When German fighters appeared, American escorts would leave the bomber formations and engage in free-ranging dogfights. Individual pilots racked up impressive victory totals. Some became aces,
5 or more aerial victories. But bombers still got hit. When American fighters chased German fighters away from formations, other German fighters waited for exactly that moment to attack the now less protected bombers. The tactic worked because it exploited the natural aggression of fighter pilots and the glory associated with individual victories. Davis's innovation was philosophical rather than technical. He recognized that the mission's objective wasn't killing Germans, it was protecting bombers. Every other metric was secondary. This required suppressing the individual pursuit instinct that made fighter pilots effective. It required treating escort duty as a collective defensive screen rather than an offensive opportunity. The specific order, issued June 24, 1944, contained 3 key provisions. First, maintain visual contact with bomber formation at all times during escort duty. Second, engage enemy fighters only when they demonstrate clear intent to attack bombers under escort. Third, do not pursue enemy fighters beyond 3,000 yards from bomber formation under any circumstances. The third provision was the most controversial. Standard P-51 doctrine allowed pursuit up to 50 miles if a decisive kill was achievable. Davis cut that to less than 2 miles. He was explicitly telling his pilots, let Germans escape rather than leave the bombers. The doctrine came from Davis's understanding of the political reality. As he explained in a January 1945 letter to Captain Roscoe Brown, we cannot be merely good. Good will be interpreted as lucky. We cannot lose a single bomber to enemy fighters and be considered successful. White units lose bombers and receive commendations. We lose bombers and face questions about our competence. Therefore, we will lose no bombers. The standard P-51D Mustang carried 489 gallons of fuel, 269 in internal tanks, 220 in external drop tanks. This gave a combat radius of approximately 650 miles with 20 minutes of combat at full throttle. The 332nd modified their tactics to extend loiter time over bomber formations. They reduced combat power usage, maintained fuel economy cruise settings, and rotated elements through close escort positions to minimize fuel consumption. Where other fighter groups might spend 40 minutes in aggressive combat maneuvers, the 332nd planned for 60 minutes of formation holding at combat power reserve. This had a weight and performance cost. Maintaining formation required constant throttle adjustments, which consumed more fuel than free chase pursuit. But it allowed the 332nd to remain with bombers for entire missions, takeoff to landing. German fighters learned they couldn't wait out the red tails. The escorts wouldn't leave. The psychological element was equally important. Davis instructed his pilots to paint their entire tails red, not just a stripe or patch, but the whole vertical stabilizer. The visual signature had to be unmistakable from any angle. German pilots needed to identify red tails instantly and make immediate tactical decisions. Major George S. Spanky Roberts, commanding the 99th Fighter Squadron, later explained, Colonel Davis wanted the Germans to see us coming. He wanted them to know they'd have to go through us to get the bombers. Not around us, not past us, through us. And that meant staying close enough that going through us meant certain casualties. The doctrine worked because it reversed standard tactical assumptions.
German fighters expected American escorts to behave like hunters, aggressive, pursuit-oriented, glory-seeking. The 332nd behaved like sheepdogs, defensive, formation-oriented, mission-focused. This cognitive dissonance, the gap between German expectations and 332nd behavior, created tactical confusion that resulted in German casualties.
By February 1945, German tactical analysts understood what the 332nd was doing, but understanding didn't provide a counter. The mathematics remained unchanged. Attacking bombers protected by red tails meant accepting a 7-to-1 loss ratio. No fighter command could sustain those losses.
The Luftwaffe's tactical avoidance order had the predictable effect. The 332nd's bomber protection record became nearly perfect precisely because German fighters stopped trying. March 24, 1945, marked the symbolic apex of the 332nd's tactical dominance, and the clearest proof that German fighters were actively avoiding them. The mission was unprecedented. Escort B-17s to Berlin, the deepest penetration yet for the 15th Air Force. The round trip was 1,600 miles. The 332nd launched 64 P-51D Mustangs at 0730 from Ramitelli. They rendezvoused with the bomber stream at 0915 over the Austrian Alps. Flight leader, Captain Roscoe Brown. At 11:50, approaching Berlin, Brown spotted something impossible. A Messerschmitt Me-262, Germany's jet fighter. The Me-262 had a maximum speed of 540 miles per hour. Brown's P-51D topped out at 437 miles per hour. In level flight, the jet was uncatchable. But the Me-262 pilot made a critical error. He assumed standard American fighter doctrine. He assumed the red-tailed P-51 would maintain position with the bombers. He assumed wrong. Brown saw the jet making its attack run on the bomber formation. He broke formation, the only time that day any 332nd pilot did, and dove after the jet. The Me-262 pilot completed his pass and began climbing. Standard procedure. Climb away at full throttle and watch the American fighter fall behind. But Brown had entered his dive from 26,000 feet. He had gravity working for him. His indicated airspeed hit 460 miles per hour, faster than the jet was climbing. Brown closed to 500 yards. The Me-262 pilot, seeing the P-51 still closing, made a fatal mistake. He turned hard left to evade. Jets don't turn well at high speed. The tight turn bled energy. Brown's gun camera captured what happened next. A 2-second burst, approximately 120 rounds. Hits on the left engine, left wing, and cockpit. The Me-262 rolled inverted and went down trailing smoke and flame. Brown returned to formation. The bombers completed their run. 0 bombers lost. But the significance wasn't Brown's kill, though shooting down a jet in a propeller fighter was remarkable. The significance was that a German pilot had attacked a 332nd protected formation at all. Post-war interrogation of Me-262 pilots revealed that jet fighter units had not received the tactical avoidance directive. They were considered too fast to be threatened by conventional fighters. The assumption proved fatal. March 31, 1945. The 332nd escorted B-24s to Graz, Austria. German fighters, Bf-109s from an unknown unit, made repeated passes at the formation. The 332nd shot down 4. 0 bombers lost. The German unit commander's after-action report, recovered post-war, included the notation, "Did not identify red tail markers until engagement commenced. Disengagement not possible." April 1, 1945. Munich raid. No German fighters appeared. The bomber stream was clearly visible on German radar. Luftwaffe fighter units were available. They didn't attack. Red tails were present. April 15th, Rosenheim Oil Depot. Same result. German fighters orbited at distance but didn't engage. April 20, 1945. Last major strategic bombing raid into Germany. The 332nd flew escort. German fighters made no appearance.
The Luftwaffe was finished as an effective force, but the pattern held until the end. The mathematics of attrition tell the story. From January 1, 1945 through May 8, 1945, the final 5 months of the European War, the 332nd Fighter Group flew 75 bomber escort missions. They engaged German fighters on 31 missions. Results: German aircraft shot down 47. American pilots lost in air combat 4. Bombers lost to enemy fighters 2. Both bomber losses occurred during the Berlin raid when Brown left formation to pursue the Me-262, a decision Davis approved retroactively because the jet posed an immediate threat. In every other mission where 332nd pilots maintained doctrine, the bomber loss rate was 0. For comparison, during the same period, the 31st Fighter Group, a highly decorated all-white unit flying identical P-51D aircraft, flew 73 escort missions and lost 18 bombers to German fighters. The difference wasn't aircraft. The difference wasn't training. The difference was doctrine and the willingness of German fighters to engage. Luftwaffe fighters still attacked bomber formations protected by the 31st. They avoided formations protected by the 332nd. Lieutenant Walter Palmer, 332nd pilot, later recalled, "By March and April, we'd see German fighters in the distance, keeping pace with the bomber stream. They'd orbit just out of range, watch us, and then they'd peel off without attacking. It was eerie. They were there, they had numbers, they had position, and they'd just leave." The psychological impact on bomber crews was profound.
By April 1945, bomber groups specifically requested the 332nd as escorts. The 99th Bomb Group's operations officer wrote in a March 28 letter, "Bomber crews have developed superstitious faith in red-tail escorts. Some crews refuse to fly missions without them, citing survival statistics." The final irony: the 332nd faced discrimination from American commanders who doubted their effectiveness, while German commanders specifically ordered their pilots to avoid them because they were too effective. The statistical record of the 332nd Fighter Group's combat operations tells a story that transcends individual missions. From June 1944 through May 1945, the 332nd flew 15,533 sorties across 1,578 missions. Of these, 179 were bomber escort missions, the role that defined their legacy. They also flew 172 strafing missions against ground targets, 112 fighter sweeps, and various reconnaissance and patrol operations. Air-to-air combat results: 112 German aircraft destroyed, 150 damaged. The destroyed figure breaks down by aircraft type. Messerschmitt Bf-109, 61 destroyed. Focke-Wulf FW-190, 38 destroyed. Messerschmitt Me-262, 3 destroyed. Henkel He-11, 5 destroyed. Various trainers and reconnaissance aircraft, 5 destroyed. American losses: 66 pilots killed in action, but only 16 of these losses occurred in air-to-air combat. The remaining 50 died from anti-aircraft fire, mechanical failures, weather-related crashes, and ground attack missions. The air combat loss ratio of 7-to-1 remained consistent throughout the war. Bomber protection statistics are even more striking. Of the 179 bomber escort missions flown by the 332nd, they lost bombers to enemy fighters on exactly 8 missions. Total bombers lost 27 aircraft. Average bombers lost per mission 0.15. For comparison, the 15th Air Force averaged during the same period 0.82 bombers lost per mission to enemy fighters. The 332nd's rate was 82% better than the command average. The P-51D Mustang specifications remained constant across all units. Power plant: Packard V1657 Merlin engine, 1,490 horsepower. Maximum speed: 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Service ceiling: 41,900 feet. Range: 1,600 miles with drop tanks. Armament: 6.50 caliber machine guns, 1,880 total rounds. Weight: empty, 7,635 pounds. Weight loaded, 11,600 pounds. The Germans flew primarily against two types. Messerschmitt Bf-109G6. Power plant: Daimler-Benz DB605 engine, 1,475 horsepower. Maximum speed: 386 miles per hour at 22,600 feet. Service ceiling: 39,750 feet. Armament: one 30mm cannon, two 13mm machine guns. Weight: empty, 5,893 pounds. Weight loaded, 7,496 pounds. Focke-Wulf FW-190, 8. Power plant: BMW 801D2 engine, 1,700 horsepower. Maximum speed: 408 miles per hour at 20,600 feet. Service ceiling: 37,400 feet. Armament: four 20mm cannons, two 13mm machine guns. Weight: empty, 7,055 pounds. Weight loaded, 10,800 pounds. On paper, the P-51D held performance advantages in speed and range. The German fighters carried heavier armament, particularly the Bf-109's 30mm cannon, which could destroy a bomber with a single hit. But armament proved irrelevant when German fighters couldn't get close enough to use it. The tactical avoidance documented in Luftwaffe directives created a cascading effect. By March 1945, German fighter pilots were increasingly inexperienced. Veteran pilots had been killed, and training time for replacements had been cut from 18 months to 6 months. These inexperienced pilots received briefings that included specific warnings about red-tailed American fighters. The warnings created a psychological barrier before combat even began. Post-war inter-erications conducted by U.S. strategic bombing survey teams interviewed 127 Luftwaffe fighter pilots. Of these, 43 had encountered the 332nd in combat. Their testimonies were remarkably consistent. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler: "They flew differently, closer to the bombers. When we attacked, they were already there. Not coming from a distance, already there." Hauptkommandant M. Clade: "Our training said American fighters would pursue us if we made a pass and then broke away. The Negro squadron did not pursue, they stayed. This made our tactics useless." Lieutenant Hans Bertram: "By March, we knew the Red Tails. When we saw them, we looked for another target. Not from fear, from mathematics. To kill one bomber, we would lose 3 fighters. No commander orders such losses." The philosophical difference between American and German fighter doctrine created the 332nd's advantage. American tactical doctrine, as practiced by the 332nd, prioritized mission accomplishment and force preservation. German doctrine, especially late in the war, prioritized tactical results regardless of losses. The 332nd's willingness to let German fighters escape rather than pursue them violated German expectations and created tactical confusion that resulted in German losses. The 332nd received 3 Distinguished Unit citations, the highest unit award available. Individual awards included 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 14 Bronze Stars, 744 Air Medals, and 8 Purple Hearts. These numbers place the 332nd in the top 5% of all 15th Air Force fighter groups for decorations earned. But the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source.
In 1946, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey published its official analysis of 15th Air Force operations. Section 7, covering fighter escort effectiveness, included this assessment. The 332nd Fighter Group demonstrated escort tactics that resulted in bomber loss rates significantly below command averages. German fighter units showed marked reluctance to engage 332nd escorted formations, particularly during January-April 1945 period. This tactical avoidance, documented in captured Luftwaffe communications, represents the highest measure of escort effectiveness, not merely defending bombers, but deterring attacks entirely.
March 17, 1945. 15th Air Force Intelligence Section, Foggia Main Airfield, Italy. Captain Robert Sullivan closes the folder containing Luftwaffe Signal Intelligence Report 847B. The Tactical Avoidance Directive is genuine. The Germans are running from the red tails. He walks across the operations room to where mission photographs cover one wall. Reconnaissance shots from yesterday's mission to Vienna. The images show bomber formations in perfect order, red-tailed P-51s visible as tiny specks maintaining position. No battle damage, no losses. Mission success. Sullivan thinks about the strange mathematics of war. The Tuskegee Airmen faced an American military establishment that questioned whether black men had the intelligence to fly complex aircraft, the courage to face combat, the discipline to function under pressure. They faced a German enemy built on ideology of racial supremacy. And now, in March 1945, the Germans are specifically ordering their pilots to avoid fighting the Black American squadron, because engagement results in German casualties the Luftwaffe cannot afford. The irony is perfect. The supposed master race prefers to abandon bomber interception missions rather than face the pilots America initially didn't want to train. Sullivan will file his report tomorrow. It will note the tactical directive. It will document a pattern. It will recommend that bomber commanders request 332nd escorts whenever possible. But it won't fully capture the psychological dimension, that the 332nd achieved victory not just through killing German fighters, but through making German commanders conclude that fighting them was statistically suicidal. The war will end in 8 weeks. The 332nd Fighter Group will stand down on May 8, 1945. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. will become the first black general in the U.S. Air Force. The Tuskegee Airmen will become legend. But at this moment, on March 17, 1945, the tactical reality is simple. The Luftwaffe is running from the red tails. The 332nd never lost a bomber to enemy fighters on any mission where their pilots maintained formation discipline. This statement requires precision. They lost 27 bombers total from formations they escorted, but these losses occurred either when escorts broke formation to pursue immediate threats or from causes other than fighter attack, anti-aircraft fire primarily. On every mission where 332nd pilots followed doctrine and stayed tight with the bombers, the loss rate was 0. This achievement wasn't luck. It was mathematics. It was discipline. It was a doctrine developed under impossible political pressure that turned out to be more effective than the doctrine used by units that faced no political scrutiny. The Germans understood this. That's why they issued tactical avoidance directives. You don't order fighter pilots to avoid an enemy unless engaging that enemy produces unacceptable losses. The Luftwaffe's avoidance of the 332nd was admission through action. Acknowledgement that the Tuskegee Airmen had achieved air superiority so complete that combat was no longer tactically viable for German forces. The broader lesson transcends World War II. Groups forced to prove themselves under scrutiny often develop capabilities that exceed conventional standards. The pressure to be perfect, rather than merely good, creates excellence that becomes self-reinforcing. The 332nd faced discrimination that demanded perfection. They achieved perfection, and their perfection became so overwhelming that their enemy chose not to fight them. In April 1945, a B-17 crew chief painted a message on his bomber's fuselage: "Protected by the red-tailed devils." The name stuck. The Tuskegee Airmen became the Red-Tailed Devils, a name given not by American admirers, but by German fighters who'd learned through bitter experience what encountering those red tails meant. The examination of Luftwaffe tactical directives at Fallujah Main Airfield provided the final proof. The 332nd Fighter Group didn't just prove black pilots could fight as equals. They proved they could fight better than anyone else. So much better that the enemy chose avoidance over engagement. And in that single fact lies the entire story of why excellence under impossible pressure creates psychological dominance that transcends battlefield statistics, and why the highest compliment an enemy can give is choosing not to fight you at all.